Welcome to another episode of The Decision Clinic with me, Paul Gordon, where we dig into real decisions, real people, real lives, and real businesses. Just looking at my notes to my next guest who's about to walk in, a lady that I actually know quite well, so outside the studio. So I just want to declare that up front because I think we're going to have a fascinating conversation. And I'm intrigued what has her come to the studio and to the Decision Clinic today. So I'm going to say no more before we get started, other than welcome, Sophia Symeou. It's wonderful to have you here in the Decision Clinic. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks, Paul.
Great.
I'm really excited to be here.
Fantastic. Well, one of the things I like to do is, as anyone comes into the clinic, I just like to understand a little bit about their history, what brought them here, and of course, this is a decision clinic, so I'm always looking for the decisions maybe throughout your life that have led you to this very moment. So perhaps, and of course, the toughest challenge, in 20 words or less, give us your life story.
I'm the accidental everything, Paul. I'm an accidental entrepreneur. I would love to say I had a keen plan for my life. The most focused I ever was when I was at school and I knew I wanted to do social work.
Right.
And absolutely, that's all I ever wanted to do. And the road there was a bit torturous, but I got there and I spent the first 7 or 8 years of my life in community, working with people on probation and parole, working with refugees, working with youth in our western suburbs, setting up the very first neighbourhood dispute centre in Blacktown, the first refuge focused on women escaping violence in Liverpool. So my early life was just all about community.
I'd just love to ask you a little bit more about that, particularly because that clarity of I want to go into social work. What was behind that, if you're able to say? Because there's a decision you made somewhere as a young lady that you said, this is where I want to go. And I'm always interested in unpicking decisions, particularly for the benefit of people listening to go, oh, that's the point I'm at in my life.
I grew up in a household with a father in particular who was very much about the world and things bigger than us. And so going into a helping profession is probably not a shock for anyone who knows our family. But when I looked at it, I didn't want to be a teacher. There was nothing worse. I thought of nursing.
Yeah.
But it just didn't. I respected it, but it didn't pull me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I can only say it was an emotional decision. And then the course I did was I did a lot of homework and I didn't fit at school. I was the pommywog in an Australia that was very white at the time. And I knew I wouldn't thrive in a big university. And my principal introduced me to Frank Hayes, he'd started a new social work course for mature age students, and they took 2 school leavers each year. And I decided that's where I wanted to go.
Interesting, yeah.
And I was totally and absolutely devastated. I didn't get in. I used to have migraines as a young person, and our GP put me on Valium and didn't tell me or my father or my mother the side effects.
Oh, goodness.
And so I went into my HSC thinking I had aced it. I was a really good student.
Yeah.
And in fact, I failed miserably, totally and absolutely. And I didn't get the marks to get into the course I wanted. And my parents, who were also equally devastated, said, you have to do something. And I went into secretarial. It was horrible. I cried every day for 6 months until my father told me to one morning, get dressed. And I said, why? He says, just put something pretty on. And he had called Frank Hayes and he apparently had said, I have no idea why my daughter wants to go to your school, but she's a good student. I don't know why she failed, but you have to take her. Hilarious. Could you imagine doing that now? I got interviewed by a couple of people. They rang me on my birthday on July 17 saying, we'll take you mid-semester.
Wow. Happy birthday.
Yeah. And it changed my life.
Yeah.
Yeah. It prepared me for any boardroom in Australia.
Wow, what a great decision that your father made. And it's always interesting to look at, you said it was an emotional decision. A lot of people discount emotions in decision making and say we should make rational decisions and park our emotion, but it's always humans that are making decisions, and humans are emotional beings. And so to not listen to our emotions can be a big failure in decision making. Yeah. And of course, our job is to balance those with the other rational aspects of decision making as well. One thing that you said is interesting. You talked about the Neighborhood Dispute Center in Blacktown. I don't know what that is, but I imagine it's decisions that disrupt neighborhoods. Someone decides to put a fence up. Someone decides to park their car in the wrong place. So I'm intrigued what a neighborhood dispute center is and how that sort of is about maybe mediating or facilitating decision making.
Totally. I was actually a youth worker, a migrant youth worker out at Mount Druitt. But to work with kids from non-English speaking backgrounds, you have to work with their families. And one of the things about Mount Druitt still, I think, is there was over 70 different cultures, and that brought with it some interesting neighbours are always, there can always be a source of disagreement. What we were finding were people coming into our centre asking for help because they were fighting with their neighbours.
Right, yeah.
I got together with the person who was running Red Cross out there, and we said, what can we do? And we started to have mediators, bring mediators in, but none of us were skilled. Nobody quite understood the dynamics sufficiently of mediation, let alone how to bring people together in that way. And we heard neighbourhood dispute centres were this thing that was starting. And it was understanding that whole communities can get disrupted by fights between neighbours. And so their whole reason for being is to try and resolve those, to reduce violence, to reduce aggravation. And we started it because we were seeing that our clientele seemed to be having more, because there was 70 cultures, but the prevailing culture was white Anglo. And so there was so much room for misunderstanding, from the music somebody played to the concreting of backyards. You know, it just was just endless and silly often.
Congratulations on creating that. It's a good indicator of if you can find some structure to support decision making, that can make a difference. And especially if it's kind of a third party structure, so we create a center that people come to. And so there's a bit of neutral ground. There's a bit of opportunity for both sides to be neither right nor wrong and hear each other. And this is not uncommon in work I'm doing in decision making, is how you take it away from person to person arguing with each other to together we're solving some kind of problem, maybe for our community. And I also imagine that one of the strongest drivers of decision making is what we call context. So the sort of the world that surrounds, the assumptions, the environment, etc. And that's probably a perfect example of different contexts. I mean, culture is a strong context for people making decisions, and different cultures coming together. The assumption that I make about a turn of phrase I use might mean something completely different to you, but my assumption is it means this. And if you think it means something different, we've already got conflict. So the providing an environment to kind of deal with all those things, I think, is genius. So I just wanted to ask you about that. Now, I could sit here and talk to you all day, so I'm mindful I've got to always have to keep my eye on the clock. So you say you're an accidental entrepreneur. So where would you say your entrepreneurial journey started?
Very, very early in life, I would see opportunities in our local area. I would say, there isn't this. Mum and Dad, there isn't this. There's the opportunity. And I have an idea a minute, but I never acted on it. I'm the world's biggest procrastinator. There was no one in my life that was in business, so it never actually occurred to me that was a choice. It's just that I used to see opportunities and I would start things. So even in primary school, I was in 5th class and I ran drama for kindy. It was like that kind of organizer was there. I fell into the public service. I was a public servant at New South Wales for 10 years at a time when the public service was glorious and it was everything that you expect in a public service. Yes, it was large. Yes, it was laborious. It was all of those things. But the people in it believed passionately in public service. And there wasn't the interference we see now at a government level. So it was just the most beautiful time to be a public servant. And I did many different roles, but I ended up in learning and development as one of them. And I ended up as president of the government trainers group. And that just brought me to the attention of large federal committees and what have you, accidentally, just because I was there. And that brought me to the attention of the head of what was then the Public Employment Industrial Relations Authority, which ran industrial relations for New South Wales government. They were wanting to bring in some change. They needed to move from a no culture to a yes culture, and they could see the work that I had done because I set up New South Wales government's first industrial relations consulting service for them. But they could see the work I'd done in learning and development. And so they said, could you come across and do that here? And the way I did it was to set up this consulting service. Now that was the beginning of my entrepreneurial journey. And I knew nothing about consulting, but I was an avid learner. And the American car company at that time was doing some extraordinary things. And I thought, I wonder if I could translate some of that. And so I did. I took some of the concepts that they were doing. And then, of course, enterprise bargaining. The reason I got my opportunity in industrial relations was that Nick Reiner introduced sweeping changes in industrial relations. And so I didn't know what an award was, but I was given the opportunity to learn this new legislation. And I had a really smart boss, because when I walked in and said, but I don't believe in this, he said, here's my challenge to you. Give it 8 weeks. Go and learn everything you can and then come back and tell me how you can align what you've learnt with what you believe. For a sexist, whatever man that he was, he would have these moments of total thoughtfulness.
Yeah.
And that's what I did. And I realised I could bring family-friendly and flexible work practices using enterprise bargaining into the public sector.
So use the machine, deliver the outcomes that you're committed to.
Yeah. And, you know, incredibly lucky. There was John Fay as our minister, and then he became premier. Then I had Kerry Chikarovsky as my minister and Jane Diplock. I had these extraordinary people and my directors who just kind of let me do. My directors didn't believe in the thing I was doing, but they could see the value and they could see the support I was getting at the senior level.
That's really an interesting example of using a decision-making lens. There's a decision process called enterprise bargaining, and you said, well, that process exists. So how do we engage with that process for the decisions that I'm committed to, family-friendly working practices, et cetera, et cetera? What's your view on enterprise bargaining as a decision process? Because this is really I'm always fascinated in decision processes that make decisions on behalf of other people and how other people participate in those decisions or don't participate in those decisions and how those decisions play out in service of the people that they affect.
I think it's like anything. The reason you do it often impact the outcome. I mean, look at any social political structure, whether it's democracy, whether it's socialism, whether it's communism. It's not the ism that's the issue, it's the practice of it. So the same with enterprise bargaining. It was brought in to break the unions, and it was brought in under the guise that we are going to communicate directly with our employees. Yeah. But the fact is, it is not an equal relationship. And I would hear time and time again from managers, but we'll support our staff. And that's nonsense. That's why unions were born in the first place. So enterprise bargaining has at its root inequality. But what it can achieve regardless, if you recognize that and allow employees to set up collective groups and negotiate and get advice and do all of those things, then it can achieve some fabulous things at a local level.
Right. Yeah. So just to jump, you said the consulting service, that was kind of what you created. So was that the foundation of your business?
Yeah, that was, because when the government changed and Bob Carr came in, I was set to go to the US. I had an exchange. I was going to go over to Washington on an exchange with somebody at the Department of Labor, but that all fell through. So I left the public service at that time and I picked up a job with a Chicago-based company, a learning and development company, and I spent 2 years in the States and working with some extraordinary companies, you know, Motorola, Estee Lauder, like some really amazing companies. And then I came back and I set up my own consulting company. So that was the next stage.
And what was the impetus for doing that versus coming back into another role in the public service or another role somewhere else? There was some decision in there somewhere.
I think in the industrial relations consultancy, I developed a taste for it.
Yeah.
And when I had moved out of community, I knew I didn't want to go back into government, but I wasn't ready to go back. I wanted to play bigger. And consulting allowed me to do that. And I did some really big projects. And the one that led to INS, my HR company, was New South Wales government leased all the country rail infrastructure to the federal government. There was 6,000 souls impacted.
Right.
3,000 of those were mostly middle-aged men in rural Australia, where sometimes the railways was the only job in town. And you've never heard of it. You talk to people and they never heard of that transition because we did it so well.
Yeah.
And the basis of my consulting company was of INS, which stands for In No One's Shadow, we always say people are our most important resource. And yet the first thing we do when we want to restructure is chuck them out. It's like it never ceases to amaze me.
Yeah.
And so, you know, my heart just broke for these people. But I was representing government and I had to find a way. And so we started an INS type thing, a process for supporting people to make their decision around redeployment or redundancy, helping them identify their transferable skills, helping them work through all of that so that they could leave with a plan or find alternate employment in the public service.
Yeah.
And there is no excuse when you have large organisations like government, or you have banks or places that have many, many, many different opportunities to place people. To me, there is little excuse to make people redundant first. It is identify transferable skills. How else might you use these people who have given you? And you see, I'm a social worker at heart.
So what I hear is what you were doing in INS was supporting people with their decision making and creating a context for their decision making that had them have options. Because I would imagine for many people in that circumstance, it looks bleak, right? It looks like we're going to make you redundant. That's all there is. Kind of suck it up and get on with it and don't make too much noise on the way out. Thanks very much, right? And so what you created was something that said, well, there are options and you have some say in your decision as to what's going to happen with your future. Now, what do we do about that? Well, we want to identify actually what skills you have, what capability you have, identify where those opportunities might be and kind of put the whole thing together in a way that allowed for, and I can hear it in the background, redundancy last rather than redundancy first. You know, that may end up still being the answer, but let's not have that be the answer. One of the things I talk constantly about in decision making is we need to have real options. And when it doesn't look like we've got real options, when it looks like it's this or nothing, our ability to engage with that and frankly, our ability to be satisfied with that as an outcome is severely limited. Whereas if we have 3, 4 options in front of us, we might still pick redundancy. And then our experience of that is, well, that's the choice I made, so I can live with that. And so the outcomes are so much better just from having options to consider. And I can hear that.
Totally. And I guess I learnt from my father in that Dad was at Australia Post and they were pushing the old buggers out. He took redundancy and he was young and he took it because the money was too good to refuse, apart from all the pressure. But he took it because the money was too good to refuse. And I could see that in these people we were working with too. Sometimes the money is too good to refuse, but it isn't an emotional decision. And what else is there?
Yeah.
So when you were talking about all those things you just said, it is about helping them. They know they're going to make that decision, but how they get there and what they do with that information and having some time to process and create a plan. And our plan always used to encourage them to include their family and friends.
After my own heart, engaging stakeholders in decisions, which frequently, especially about roles or new careers or whatever, are often seen as very individual. It's my decision. It affects me. But until we lift our horizon a little bit and engage our family, our friends, maybe our current co-workers in the conversation at least, now not asking them to make the decision for us, but having them in the conversation so we understand how this decision impacts upon them, can totally change our perspective on the decision. And I always talk about the key is making decisions that stick. And in this case, what sticking sometimes looks like is being satisfied with it once you've made the decision and then getting on with it, rather than spending the rest of your life going, I wish I'd never done that. And that was a terrible deciation. So that's genius that you were bringing people's families and so on into the conversation.
And the people who broke my heart were, and they were mostly men. Every now and then you'd get who wouldn't tell anyone that they'd been made redundant.
Right,
and they'd come to our office every single day and they'd leave home as if they were working and they couldn't go home until the time they would normally go home. And we would work so hard with them to try and move them because the shame.
One of my former guests in the Decision Clinic was Tony Nash, founder of Utopia. And one of the things he said when I talked to him about his kind of departure was he had to get clear with himself that he is not his business. And it's the same as your job role. Western society has us almost intertwined with who we are, who we know ourselves to be as a human and our job role. So I can imagine many people suddenly without that job role didn't know who they were. And so they had to keep on the kind of almost for themselves, I keep turning up to work and so on. Who I am is I get up, I leave the house at 8 o'clock in the morning and so on.
And it's really interesting because I've seen that in my decision when I moved because Bill Ferry's was concurrent. We started it, I was still running INS, but at the time I decided to focus entirely on Bill Ferry's, I shut down INS. I didn't sell it. I never set it up for sale. My long-term plan was I had a successor in mind, and that just didn't work out. All good things, just sometimes. And it was the right decision for me just to close it, not to try and sell it. I wasn't going to do a long buyout, and consulting companies are just hard to sell. I see people, and in the entrepreneurial world we're in, that's a judgment. Like, you didn't sell it. So it was, probably wasn't worth anything. You probably made a really bad decision. Like 1,000 judgments. You just see it. Yeah. And some people say it out loud and some just say it with their faces. It's like, and I go, decisions are made for many reasons.
What I think you're pointing to there, what I can hear in what you're saying is decisions are always about trade-off. And the more consciously we make those trade-offs, the more satisfied we can be with the outcome. And so the trade-off with your father saying, actually, the financial trade-off was worth the other trade-offs that I might had to give up in order to get the financial outcome. Being able to make that consciously means you can own that decision. So your trade-off of, I don't want some long drawn out thing. My succession plan didn't work out. So now my options in front of me look like this. The one I'm going to take is actually, I just want to shut it down. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm interested. So how long ago was that you'd said that INS is no more?
I think it was last Christmas I shut down. A year ago, I walked away completely. Yeah.
Yeah. And so as you reflect now, is that, okay, yep, I'm satisfied with that.
Never had a moment of regret. Never
Yeah.
had a moment of regret. And I'm all in Bell Fairies.
For me, regret is a symptom of a decision that's not made well. It's not about the right or the wrong decision. It's about how you made the decision. And if you took your time, looked at the trade-offs, made it clear, I'm going to own that decision, then a good indicator of that is no regret, right? That's always interesting to hear examples. I was in these conversations, always like to point to key decisions and say, what's the characteristics of that made that effective or ineffective? So you've said the name Bill Fairies, and that's where you are right now. That's your thing. So just tell us a little bit about that. You say you started that up kind of in parallel. So there must have been a decision at some point that said, oh, this thing looks interesting.
See, I told you I'm an accidental everything. So Jenny Gabrielle, who's my business partner, actually was working with me in my HR company. She was my executive officer. I actually stole her from EO Sydney. She was the equivalent of our general manager now. Yeah. But at that time, there was just her. And when EO Sydney was making some changes, that role wasn't hers. And I was smart enough to take her before anybody else realised that she was even on the market. So she became my executive officer. And through that process, during that time, she separated from her son's father. And he wasn't being particularly helpful with paying bills. And it was Christmas, and she went home to her family and came back to her home with that pile of lovely but useless gifts you often get.
Yes, yeah.
She put them on the living room table, and she was just sitting there, and she looked up in her kitchen cabinet and she saw her pile of bills. And you know those aha moments they talk about?
Yeah.
Well, that was hers. She went, wouldn't it have been lovely if all the generosity that went to giving me these gifts went to helping me start the new year with no bills? And she looked for a service of that kind, nothing in Australia, nothing internationally. And it just stayed with her and stayed with her. And now we closed for the Christmas break. And when she came back to work, she pitched it. And I loved the idea. And at first I said to her, because I'd helped a couple of my team start their own business, I'm happy to support you. And she said, no, I want to go in 50-50 with you. I didn't even think about it. I just said yes. Truly, if you say divine intervention, intuition, you could call it 1,000 different things. I don't know. But I am a risk taker. I have a big appetite for risk, but I never saw it as risky. But I also didn't take any heed of it. So Jenny was able to do everything she needed to do whilst working with me. And I'd come in and out around business decisions or, you know, whether we needed licenses for different things. And I just used my expertise. I said, we need to get this trademark, like all the stuff that I'd learnt, I had applied it. But Jenny was Bill Fairies. She worked with the developer to build it. I truly, for the first whatever period of time, had very little engagement with it. I'd come in and out because my focus was all INS.
Interesting to hear your experience of, because this is not uncommon for entrepreneurs. One of the things that makes entrepreneurs what entrepreneurs are is because, as you pointed to yourself, you see something and then you kind of go for it. You know, many people see things, but the entrepreneurs are the ones who then say, okay, we're going to do something about that. And so the entrepreneurs getting involved in new things is pretty common. That's not uncommon, but interesting the decision you made as to how your level of participation in it and so on. And I suppose I'm interested in the decision at which you kind of flipped over. So you said, actually, enough for INS. This is the time to give it my all into Bill Fairies.
I think it was gradual. We launched big. We launched on the Today Show. It was fantastic. We were going really well, but then COVID hit and people had nothing better to do than steal credit cards and buy Bill Fairies vouchers. Well, that's how it seemed to us. And we were too young and inexperienced to manage that level of fraud. So we just shut down our B2C overnight. We just stopped selling direct to
Right.
consumer. And so as we were sitting there wondering what to do with the thing called bill fairies, Prezi knocked on our door. And we still don't know who our guardian angels were who went to Prezi management and said, why don't you have bill fairies? We still don't know who that was. But thank you, whoever you are, if you
Another
ever listen to
entrepreneur out
this.
there looking for new ideas and opportunities.
Yeah. And so Prezi said, yes, we'd like you. We've got nothing like it. And they made many accommodations. They didn't do service fees. We insisted on a service fee because that's how we make our money. So many accommodations. And it's been a wonderful relationship. And now we're looking at a broader range of resellers, but Prezi has been great. And then shortly after or around the same time, charities, first one, then two, then three, started knocking on our door. And it was kind of accidental. We don't know quite why. The first person rang us and said, hey. And then before you knew it, we're working with Uniting and Wesley Mission, and they had the contract, the federal government contract for what it was then called the Escaping Violence. It's now called Leaving Violence Program. And so charities were using us to help people escape violence. And then other charities came to help people in emergency. And suddenly we're growing. We've grown. We sold 12.5 mil of vouchers last financial year from zero with no marketing.
It's interesting. So again, for those listening who don't know who Prezi is, so Prezi are effectively the B2C. So they deal direct with the customer. So I can, as a person in the street, I could go and buy a voucher through Prezi, and I could buy a bill fairies voucher, but I buy it via Prezi, and then you deal with Prezi to fulfill that in the back end.
It's probably a good time for me to say Bill Fairies, the only company of its kind in the world, and it's an online gift voucher company, and our vouchers pay bills, 21,000 different bills. We use BPay, and that's how we control what billers we pay and don't pay.
Right.
We only do bona fide bills. So we don't do credit cards because that buys you shoes and holidays.
Yeah.
If you think about what BPay pays, you know, rent, education, medical, tax, fines, your Opal card, we will pay anything that's not a discretionary spend.
I can see the jump, right? So Jenny's there staring at the pile of shiny gifts and the pile of bills and going, what would actually make the biggest difference to me would be the pile of bills, not the pile of gifts. So instead of someone saying, here's a, I don't know, whatever it might be, a new phone.
It's a hand cream or a can.
Owl or something like that. Yeah.
People just shove in a cupboard or re-gift.
Yes. Instead, it's like, actually, here's a contribution that allows you to pay down your phone bill or pay down your internet or pay your fine or whatever it might be.
Yep.
So giving the gift of some freedom for the people you're giving it to. And also when I think of this, I hear of this as what you're doing is helping those people who receive the gift in making more responsible decisions. So their decision as to if it's just a random voucher for a random store, the decision might be as they walk through the store, oh, I could buy that fun thing, not that thing that might make a difference to my life. What you've done is said, actually, we're going to help you make the decisions responsibly that deal with your life and help the people who buy the vouchers to contribute to people's freedom and well-being rather than just a pile of stuff that's in landfill somewhere.
Yeah. We call it conscious giving, no waste. Our world is full of consumerism, right? And most of the things we buy end up in landfill. And I give hampers. There's always a time for hampers. But, you know, if you think about receiving a hamper, half of it stays in your pantry, never used. It's got all the beautiful bits that make it look fluffy that ends up in the bin and landfill. And then you have this basket. What the hell do you... So that ends up in landfill if you don't find another use for it. You know, the same with vouchers, like 30% of vouchers go unused. How many of us have vouchers in our bottom drawers? But what we're finding with Bill Fairies vouchers is it's about our life. It's about the cost of living. And so we use it.
Yeah, I think that's what's interesting for me. If I look at the decision to give a Bill Fairies voucher, the decision to use it, and therefore the action that comes from the decision. So when I decide to give you a Bill Ferries voucher and then you decide to redeem it against your phone bill or whatever it might be, what I've done is help you in taking some action through the decisions that I've made and through the decision that you've made. That's what impact looks like, right? The decisions that you make and then the action that you take are the thing that will change the world. And if your experience is a bit of relief from the pressure of that bill, or the gratitude towards me for helping you with something that actually matters to you, it's a self-reinforcing outcome.
And one of the big issues for us is how we re-educate the market that Bill Ferries vouchers is not just about those in need. We all have bills. Nobody wants to pay them. So it is, how can we become one of the top 3 things you think about when you want to give a gift? We may not be always the choice you make, but we're up there where, you know, when you're thinking, you'll go, this, or a Bill Ferries. Does it fit?
So looking at that through the lens of decision making, I think that's the genius there, because now we have options. At this time of year, as we come towards holidays and so on, people are thinking about gifts, thinking about what they give, and always the challenge, how do we use good decision practices in making decisions about what we give? By putting another kind of option on the table, it allows people to make their decisions much more consciously, rather than do I give the candle or the hand cream? It's, well, the candle, the hand cream, or the Bill Ferries voucher. And often the reason I always talk about at least 3 options is, once we have 3 options in front of us, we are much more confident in our decision and we can see much more clearly what actually matters to us. And it might be we want to give the candle because that supports our friend who's got a candle company, or we might want to give the candle because every time I come in your house, it smells a bit funny. So have a nice smelling thing. There's other reasons why the candle might be the answer, but it will highlight that for me when I look at it compared to, say, a Bill Ferries voucher. So by giving people the choice, if the one thing you're doing is increasing people's options so they can make clearer decisions, even if they don't buy more Bill Ferries vouchers, that alone is a contribution, is how I think of it.
Yeah. And it's really interesting. And that re-education piece is really important. Like my sister, who is a total supporter of Bill Ferries, is looking at buying, I don't even know, a very expensive brand of chocolates for her friends. And I said to her, for the price of those chocolates, why don't you buy them a Bill Ferries voucher?
Yeah.
But it is that emotional thing we still need to help people come to understand. Conscious giving, no waste. You're not making a judgment about somebody's life. You're saying, I'm giving you freedom from bills.
At the mechanical level, the voucher doesn't come with it as to what you spend it on. You can only spend it on any of this list, right? So when I give you a Bill Ferries voucher, I'm not saying you're too poor to pay your, gas bill. I'm saying you have things in your life that cost money that are bills.
We won't allow someone to say you can, and we won't tell you what bill they pay either. Violet is my favourite grandma, who has 3 grandchildren, and one of them she calls her no-hoper grandson. And she buys the vouchers and then she rings me and she goes, Soph, has he used it? And I say, Violet, I can't tell you. Just tell me he's redeemed it, because we play this game and I often give him a little nudge to make sure he redeems and use it. What did he pay? What did he pay? Violet, I'm not going to tell you.
Now, we are almost at time, and I would like to ask you, often people come to the decision clinic because they're facing a particular decision. But I just wanted to check in with you if there's a particular decision that's in your mind that in the next couple of minutes, maybe we can give you some freedom with.
I guess for us, we know that we will expand overseas and we have already done the groundwork. So it's not if, but it is that question of when. There's so much to do here. There is so much of the market we've not actually tapped into in Australia. When is the right time?
Ah, great. When is interesting because often people, when they're thinking about decisions, don't think of time as a way of making options. They always think of, should I do X or Y or Z? They don't think of, well, I could do X now or later. And so thinking about time as a sort of degree of trade-off can be very helpful for us, because as soon as you say when, my question then starts to say, well, What are some of the drivers? But let's not even think about where, let's not even think about to what degree. If the decision is when's the right time for us to go beyond Australia, then the things I would be asking for are what are the criteria that would drive that when? And what can help us is to, again, have some discrete options. Okay, let's think about some clear options. One could be literally in the new year. Okay, January is the time we're going to start to launch overseas. Okay, another realistic time horizon might be, let's say, the end of the financial year. So let's say there's a January option, there's a July option, and then maybe we'll think about something that's a couple of years out. So it's a bit further in the future. So let's say 2 years from now. And now you've got three options. Just January, July, 2 years from now are when we expand overseas. What supports us in decision making is a few assumptions. So what does that look like? It might be an assumption we might make is expanding overseas is going just to one country. That's all, that we don't need to do anything beyond that. Another assumption might be expansion looks like finding a similar distribution partner as Prezi in that country. Okay, so we've got enough of a picture as to what a January going overseas might look like, a July overseas might look like, and a 2 years out might look like. And with that in mind, you can then say, well, now let's think about what are the drivers, what are the criteria for that? And you might say the criteria relate to, I don't know, when you've got enough wherewithal, enough revenue that can fund, you'll have a good idea of what it's going to cost to go overseas, the time and effort it takes to build the relationships, the rate at which you can probably ramp up sales and distribution. You've probably got that picture. But there's probably something about when will you be ready? So the readiness to go overseas will be a driver as to maybe one of those three time horizon options. Would be one thing to think about. You might also think about the timing in relation to your view of how Australia is going. If you say, well, one of the drivers for going overseas would be to double down in Australia. So in other words, we can say Australia's leading the world. This is what we're doing here in Australia. But looking from a perspective of a driver might be how going overseas and when going overseas supports the Australia position. And so you'll have a view of the Australia position. You might say, oh, it aligns well at this point in time because that's when we might need a boost in Australia. So thinking about the relationship to Australia, thinking about when you're ready, the wherewithal to do it, the whatever you need to make it happen, could be a couple of the drivers. Is there anything else that you think of if I say what might make sooner versus later more attractive or the other way around?
Well, you mentioned Prezi. That's a ready-made market and, they're in a few countries, so that would be good. For us, the biggest thing is having a BPay equivalent options because there is no other BPay equivalent. Or how do we recreate that using technology? And then what kind of timing would it take? What kind of partners do we need to do that? Is that something we could do on our own?
So what I can hear is decisions always nested. There's many decisions that connect together. And there is probably a decision about where that you might want to kind of land that before when. And the landing of where addresses some of those, what we'd call constraints in decision making. A constraint is we need that BPay type payment where we can limit what's paid with it. Right? Without that, the model doesn't quite work. So we need something different. And then there might be some technological constraints that we've got to meet to address that. So if we can understand the constraints might drive us to where, and then once we've got a view on where, then there's a different conversation about when, wherever the where might be. Little pointer is to pick it apart a little bit using whatever drivers to say where, and some of those you just pointed to around the relationships that you need, maybe an ease of entry because Prezi already has a presence in whichever that country might be. And then once you've got a clear view of where, or at least a couple of options on where that look like they're attractive, then you can turn it around into the decision about when. It might be you say, oh yes, this country looks attractive. We know that they've just legislated for a new something financial construct, which won't come online for 12 months. So the when is now given by that, but that looks attractive to us as a country to go to because of other reasons. So the where and the when may be two things that you want to look at hand in hand, but probably start a little bit with the where. Great. Thank you. I'm glad about that. That's what we're here for. We are definitely at time. And Sophia, I'd love to say thank you for this conversation. I've enjoyed it. I always enjoy speaking with you, but just digging into a little bit about your life and what drives you. And I can really hear what's fascinating is the consistency throughout your life. I know you call yourself the accidental entrepreneur, but your passion on impacting community, your passion on providing things for others who might not be able to provide for themselves, that right from the beginning when you decided as a schoolgirl, I want to be in social work. I hear that throughout everything that you've done. Very strategic decision framework is, if we can be true to that, then we live satisfied in our decisions. And it looks like you're very satisfied with your decisions. So I'm delighted to hear that.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been great.
Thanks for being on.